I want to tell you something that took me a long time to say out loud. I was divorced at 62 and widowed at 63. Not the same man, not the same kind of grief, not the same kind of starting over, but both of them back to back in the space of 14 months. And I am here talking to you now because I want to say the thing nobody said to me when I was in the middle of it. Nobody talks about starting over twice. They talk about divorce. They talk about widowhood. There are books for both. There are support groups for both. There are women who have been through both, more of us than you would think. And what I found is that when you have been through both, you do not quite fit into either group because the grief is not the same. And the starting over is not the same. And when you try to explain it, people nod slowly and say something kind and then do not know what to say next. This episode is for the women who know exactly what I mean. Let me start at the beginning. I was married for 26 years. I will not go into everything that marriage was. That is not what this is about. But I will tell you that by the time I was 61, I had known for a long time that it was over. I had known in the way that you know things you do not want to act on. I had known and explained it away the way we do. And then one morning I woke up and I could not explain it away anymore. The divorce was finalized when I was 62. People have very specific ideas about what divorce feels like. They imagine anger, relief, freedom, and I felt some of those things. But what they do not tell you about divorce at 62 is the particular shame of it. Not shame that you are divorced, shame that it took this long. Shame that you spent so many years getting to this point. Shame that you are starting over at an age when you thought everything was supposed to be settled. I remember a woman at a gathering, someone I did not know well, asking me what my husband did. And I said, "We are divorced, actually." And she said, "Oh, recently?" And I said, "Yes, fairly recently." And she said, "Well, these things happen. You will be fine." I wanted to say, I know I will be fine. That is not the question. The question is, what do I do with the next 20 years? I was 62 years old. I was not sick. I was not frail. I was not at the end of anything except a marriage. I had, if I was lucky, 2 more full decades in front of me. And I had to figure out what I was going to do with them. That is a specific problem that nobody prepares you for. I spent the first several months after the divorce just being very practical. There is a lot to be practical about when a marriage ends. Houses, finances, what to do with 26 years of shared life. I am good at practical. Practical kept me moving. But underneath the practical, something else was happening. I was grieving, not for the marriage, or not only for the marriage. I was grieving the version of my life that I had believed in for a long time. The version where I was going to grow old with someone, where I knew what the next chapter looked like. I had lost the future I had planned, even if it was a future that had already stopped being good for me. People kept saying, "This is your time now. You can do anything." And they meant well. But I did not feel like doing anything. I felt like sitting still and figuring out who I was when I was not somebody's wife. That took longer than I expected. I also had to get used to a specific kind of loneliness that nobody warned me about. It is not the loneliness of being alone in a room. I had been alone in rooms for years while married. It is the loneliness of not having a witness. of doing things, going somewhere, making a decision, having a difficult day, and having no one who is tracking your life alongside you, no one who will remember it with you later. That was the part that caught me off guard. Not the empty house, the unwitnessed life. I started keeping a journal, not because I thought it would help, but because I needed somewhere to put the things that were happening to me, and it did help. Not in the way that self-help books promise, where you write something and it releases it, but in the quieter way of just recording it, saying, this happened, it was hard, I was here for it. That small act of witnessing myself turned out to matter more than I expected. Around 8 or 9 months after the divorce, I started to feel something shift. Not happiness exactly, but something lighter. I started going out more, seeing friends I had let drift, doing things I had quietly stopped doing in the years when the marriage was taking everything I had. I met a man. I am going to call him Robert. He was kind. He was thoughtful. He was not the same kind of man I had been married to. He asked questions and then he listened to the answers. He remembered things. He was easy to be with in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. I was not ready to call it love, but I was ready to call it something. A reason to be glad to wake up, a person to look forward to. After the year I had just had, that did not feel like a small thing. We had been seeing each other for about 5 months when he was diagnosed. He died 7 weeks later. I want to say something about what grief looks like when you have already been grieving. When Robert died, I was already tired. I had spent the better part of a year processing the end of a 26-year marriage. I had done a lot of hard emotional work. I had built something that felt slowly and carefully like the beginning of a new life, and then he was gone. The grief was different from the divorce. With the divorce, there was anger to hold on to. There was a narrative I could tell myself. There were decisions that had been made, things that had gone wrong, reasons I could point to. The grief of divorce has an argument inside it, and sometimes that argument keeps you going. The grief of losing Robert had none of that. There was no argument. There was just absence. There was a man who had been alive and warm and present in my life, and then he was not. And there was nothing to be angry at and nowhere to direct it and no story to tell myself that made it make sense. And underneath both of those things, the divorce grief and this new grief was something I had not expected. Exhaustion, a deep, specific exhaustion that came from having been knocked down twice in the same year. From having gotten up carefully on shaking legs and then been knocked down again. I did not know if I had another getting up in me. There is a woman I know named Renee. She is 66 years old. She was divorced at 59 after a marriage that had been difficult for most of its last decade. And then, at 61, she lost someone she had been building something with. Not as quickly as I lost Robert, but the loss was just as complete. I spoke to Renee about this episode. I asked her what she remembered most about that period. She said, I remember feeling like I had no right to the grief because people kept pointing out that I had not been with him that long. Like the length of it was what determined whether it counted. And I wanted to say, it counted. It counted to me. And I had already lost so much in the divorce. And now I had lost this too. And I was 61 years old and I was starting over for the second time, and nobody seemed to understand what that actually meant. She said the thing nobody told me was that starting over twice is different from starting over once. Starting over once is hard, but you still believe that if you just do the right things and give it time and take care of yourself, you will come out somewhere better. Starting over twice, you know that life can knock you down again. And that knowledge changes how you stand up. I think about that a lot. The knowledge that life can knock you down again and how you stand up differently when you carry that knowledge with you. I want to talk about what I have learned from doing this twice. The first thing is that grief does not stack the way you might expect. I thought the second grief would be added to the first, that I would be carrying twice as much. What actually happened was more complicated than that. The second grief reached back and changed how I understood the first. It made me softer about the divorce. It made me less certain about who had been right and who had been wrong. Because I had now experienced a loss that had nothing to do with rightness or wrongness, and it showed me that some of the hardness I had been carrying from the divorce was just protection, a way of not feeling the softer parts of what I had lost. The second thing is that you find out what you are actually made of. Not in the triumphant way that phrase usually sounds, not some dramatic revelation, just you find out. You discover what you go back to when everything else is taken away. For me, it was small routines, morning tea, a particular walk, phone calls with my daughter on Sunday, small, consistent things that were entirely mine and did not depend on anyone else. I had never known before how important those things were to me. I know now. The third thing is that your relationship with time changes. Before all of this, I understood time the way most people do. It was something you moved through mostly without thinking about it. After losing someone to divorce and then losing someone to death, time became something I was much more aware of, not in a morbid way, in a clear-eyed way. I started being very deliberate about how I spent it. Things I had been putting off for years, I stopped putting off. Places I had wanted to go, I started planning to actually go. Not because I had decided to live dramatically or because I had some revelation. Just because I understood, in a way I had not before, that the window is real and I would rather use it than spend it waiting for the right moment that may or may not arrive. The fourth thing is about other people. When you lose something once, people around you know what to do. There is a script. When you lose something twice in quick succession, people start to run out of script. They do not know what to say. They worry they are saying the wrong thing. Some of them quietly pull back, not out of cruelty, but out of not knowing how to help. What I needed in those months was very simple. I did not need advice. I did not need people to tell me it would get better. I needed people to sit with me, to not need me to be okay yet, to be willing to hear the same things multiple times without getting impatient. The friends who could do that were worth more to me than anything else in the world. I am going to tell you the thing that took me the longest to understand. Starting over twice does not make you half as strong. It makes you twice as clear. When I was in the middle of it, in the worst of the second year, after Robert was gone and I was 42 years into my life, feeling very uncertain about what I was doing with the rest of it, I could not have told you that. I would not have believed it. But I am on the other side of it now, and I know things I did not know before about what I want, about what I am not willing to settle for, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, about how much of my life I had spent trying to fit myself into shapes that were not mine. I know what I can survive. And knowing that, not in the abstract, not as a positive thinking exercise, but in the bone-deep way, you know something after you have actually lived it that changes you. It does not make loss hurt less, but it means that when something is hard, you do not spend energy wondering whether you can get through it. You already know you can, because you already have. Renee said something to me near the end of our conversation that I have written down and looked at many times. She said, "The women I know who have been through this twice are the least afraid of any of the women I know, not because nothing scares them, but because they know their own bottom. They know where they land when everything falls away." And that knowledge, that is something you cannot buy. You can only earn it. I think she is right. And I think it is worth saying to whoever needs to hear it today, you are not too old to start over. And if you are starting over for the second time, if life has knocked you down and you got up and then life knocked you down again, you are not cursed. You are not being punished. You are not running out of chances. You are someone who has found their bottom and survived it twice. And the women I have met who carry that with them are not women I feel sorry for. They are women I want to know. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe the most honest conversations are the most useful ones. If this reached you today, please share it with a woman who is in the middle of her own version of this, and subscribe below, because I am here every week and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.